This is the first tutorial video for Manny's FM-Xplorations, our article series about programming FMX in the Yamaha montage. The first thing that I want to cover here is the basics of the FMX waveforms. So let's go into part edit mode and look at the waveforms we have for our operators here. So we're on the form frequency page for our operator number 1 here, which you can hear in this initialized voice is just a sine wave. So we want to go over here to the spectral parameter and change the waveforms and hear what they sound like. So let's change the wave to the all 1 wave. The all 1 and 2 waves have all the integer harmonics present, but how many you hear depends on what you have set your skirt value to. So with this setting of 0, we're letting almost none of them through, so the sound is essentially the same as the sine wave. So this parameter, as I mentioned in the article, behaves a little bit like a filter. So as we raise it, we'll start hearing more of the harmonics let through. And that's very, very similar to what a filter does. The all-2 waveform, again, has all the harmonics present. The energy distribution is a little bit different, so the timbre is slightly different. Sounds a little EQ'd or filter with a little resonance quality to it. So let's hear that. So all 1, all 2. So again, essentially the sawtooth harmonic structure, just with different emphasis on different harmonics in the range. So the odd waves have all the odd integer harmonics present, which is of course the square wave structure. Again, at a skirt value of 0, you cannot hear very many of those harmonics. As you bring the skirt up, you hear all the harmonics that are available in that waveform to sound. And it's very similar to the classic square wave. Odd 2, again, like the variance on the all waves, just a slightly different balance of the energy, so it's got a slightly different timbre. So you can hear the difference between odd 1 and odd 2. So those are the all 1, all 2, odd 1, and odd 2 waveforms. The remaining waveforms are the resonance waves. So these waveforms have added a new parameter called resonance. And again, as skirt is similar to the cutoff of a filter, the resonance is very similar to the resonance of a filter. Now these resonant waves are essentially the all wave harmonic structures as before, but now we have the ability by the resonance parameter to emphasize a very specific overtone in the waveform. So right now with the skirt and resonance both at 0, very few harmonics are being let through, and the first overtone is being accentuated, so it sounds like this. So as we increase the resonance, we're going to emphasize the next overtone in the harmonic series. So you hear each of the next overtones being emphasized as you raise the resonance value. This is very similar to how you mix and match drawbars on an organ. Let's turn up the skirt a little bit and repeat. So again, to use our subtractive synthesis analogy, it's like you have a filter with a open cutoff and you move the resonance around. With the Res 2 wave, it has a different distribution of energy across all the harmonics, so it's going to sound a little different. So let's hear how it sounds with skirt. Res 1. Res 2. So especially at the higher skirt values, you're going to notice there's a lot more higher harmonic or overtone energy in the Res 2 wave. It's going to really sound a lot different when we start mixing in resonance here. So you'll notice that the skirt's all the way up and the resonance isn't as noticeable, and that's because the energy of the other harmonics is already so loud, emphasizing one isn't that big a deal. If we bring the skirt down, you can hear the resonance effect is much more obvious. This happens in both of the resonant waves. But it's greatly accentuated in the Res 2 wave with the higher skirt values. Now there's a really wide range available here, so I'm going to play down low so you can really hear how high you can emphasize these different overtones. So that's very similar to having your subtractive synthesis method of taking a filter, setting the cutoff, cranking the resonance, and sweeping it around. The coolest thing about FMX is that these parameters, skirt and resonance, can be changed in real time. So these are new behaviors that we have available to us to give us the ability to create some very different sounds in the FMX engine. Next, I'm going to go into the tutorial voice Manny Mod Tutorial 1. And this is to show what happens now when we use all those different waves as modulators in a very simplified one modulator, one carrier FM stack. So you can see here I've preset all my assignable knobs to control some specific parameters. We have the level of a sine wave modulator on knob 1, the all one wave on knob 2, all 2 on knob 3, odd 1 on knob 4, odd 2 on knob 5, res 1 on 6, res 2 on 7, and now I've put the modulator frequency ratio parameter on knob 8. So now you can see how all these parameters basically change the core part of the FM process without having to go into edit mode here. So our default is, of course, just our sine wave of our carrier wave. There's no modulation. I'm going to bring up our sine level, so you'll see our value changes. I move the knob. Now what I've also have done is assigned both the skirt and feedback parameters to the ribbon, so I can change that as well. So let's bring up our sine wave. I have the feedback here. So if you've messed around with FM over the years, you're very familiar with that type of sound. Now in addition, we can change the frequency ratio of our modulator. So what I've done here is I've set up the modulator frequency ratio on knob 8 here to step through the first 8 ratio values. Basically what that means at a level of 0, it's 1.0. At 16 it jumps to 2.0. At 32 it'll go to 3.0. 48 goes up to 4.0. And that's the first 8. And again, this is our modulator frequency ratio. To hear the difference between how you change the waveform and the harmonics you hear based on the operator ratio versus the carrier ratio, I've set up the mod wheel to change and step through the first 8 ratios for our carrier wave. So you'll hear that sounds completely different than what happens when we change our modulator ratio. So a couple more things here. So let's walk through and see the differences between how the different waves affect everything. So we're back to our default settings. Now let's hear what happens when we use the all-one wave as a modulator. Now you'll hear right off the bat that already sounds much more like a sawtooth kind of wave, where we had to use the sine and feedback to get something similar before, and that is of course because the all-one wave has all the integer harmonics present, and with a little bit of skirt, then it's essentially behaving very similar to a sine wave with feedback. So again, you can control the overall brightness with the ribbon, as that's changing the skirt value. Let's go and do the same thing here, where we play with our mod op ratio again. So bring up our level. So basically we're starting with a lot more harmonics in our modulator wave with the all-one compared to the sine, so its behavior is similar, but we have much more brightness and more harmonics in the sound at any given settings that we have here. So let's go to all-two. So you probably notice there's not that big a difference right now between the all-one and all-two waves as modulators. And to really hear that difference, we have to have a lot of modulator level and higher skirt values for the differences to show up. So let's put our all-two level up pretty high. Bring our skirt up. Now let's hear that same stuff with the all-one. So you hear that's much more standard sawtoothy wave, where with the all-two, it's got that little resonancy character. Again, we can go through and change our mod op ratios. So let's do something a little different. Let's change both our modulator and carrier ratios sort of together to see what happens here. I'm going to leave our all-two wave as our modulator, and let's go to the 3.0 value. And now we're going to use our mod wheel again to change the carrier ratio. So right now it's at 1.0. Let's go to 2. Let's go to 3. Let's go to 4. 5. That's 6. That's 7. And that's with the ribbon bringing the skirt up for our all-two level. So that may not have behaved exactly the way you expected, and that's okay. Again, play around with them, just get a handle on what they sound like, because that's what's really cool about all this. And let's go to our odd waves. So that's our odd one. So again, that's a square type wave modulating our sine. As we start changing the ratio here, sort of here we get a whole family of square wave types. Again, the differences between odd one and odd two are the same as that with all one and all two. So at given settings of high modulator level and high skirt, you'll hear the differences between the sounds. That's our odd one. This is our odd two. And remember, that's just playing with the ribbon. So those are the all one, all two, odd one, odd two waves. So let's move on to the res waves. So I've got those set up on knobs 6 and 7. We already heard what all these waves sound like in their raw state, but now let's listen to how they sound as modulators. So let's bring up our res 1 level here. So kind of a clavinet-y kind of thing. We're going to use the ribbon to bring up the skirt. So let's do the same thing for Res 2. Let's bring up the skirt. Go back to our Res 1. So the whole interaction of skirt makes a big difference on how those two sound different. Now, I've added control of resonance to the pitch bend wheel. So let's bring up our Res 1. So now you hear what happens when we control the resonance parameter of this in real time. Do the same thing for our Res 2. And now let's control the ratio here. So we went from 1.0 on our Res 2 wave to 2, and now let's do the resonance. So now that gives you sort of a flavor of what happens when we start using these complex waves as modulators.